The most dangerous part of the Epstein files isn't what's in them. It's how easily they can be weaponized to anesthetize you. Because when thousands of pages drop with names, flight logs, contact books, and investigative memos, the instinct is immediate. Scan for the headline, find the villain, declare the verdict. And in this case, the name people are hunting for is Donald Trump. The implication is simple. If his name appears, guilt must follow. But here's where it gets more complicated and more revealing. Trump's name is in the files, repeatedly. Contact logs, social correspondence, investigative summaries. That's not speculation. He and Jeffrey Epstein moved in overlapping elite circles for years. New York, Palm Beach, high-dollar events, private clubs. Trump once publicly described Epstein as someone he'd known for 15 years. That proximity is documented. It's real. And proximity to a convicted sex trafficker should unsettle any serious person. But proximity is not prosecution. And that distinction is where the temperature of this story either rises or collapses. The files being released stem from a transparency mandate that forced the Department of Justice and FBI to unseal investigative materials. Interview transcripts, agent notes, internal assessments, even portions of grand jury records. This wasn't a casual leak, it was an institutional disclosure. The kind that pulls back the curtain on how power is investigated, sometimes protected, and occasionally exposed.
It was an announcement that no one wanted to make, and so it fell to Assistant Chief Constable Oliver Wright to tell the world today in writing, quote, "Following a thorough assessment, we have now opened an investigation into this allegation of misconduct in public office."
Within those documents, Trump appears as part of Epstein's broader social world. So do hundreds of other wealthy and influential individuals. Epstein cultivated that ecosystem deliberately. Surround yourself with power, and power becomes your shield.
But it has not had since 1647. The family in whose name crimes against humanity and freedom have been committed around the world for centuries suffered its first arrest in 379 years today. The little brother character called Andrew. It is a crime taken so seriously in British common law, where it has mostly rested quietly for hundreds of years, that the crime carries a maximum penalty of death, as so many crimes did centuries ago when British common law was taking formation.
Your shield. That was the strategy. But here's the escalation. Appearing in someone's contact book is not evidence of participating in their crimes. It is evidence of association. And association in a courtroom is not enough. So the question becomes sharper. Did investigators uncover evidence tying Trump directly to criminal conduct within Epstein's operation? According to the DOJ's own internal evaluations included in these releases, specific allegations submitted about Trump, particularly those surfacing around election cycles, were assessed and deemed unsubstantiated. Career prosecutors, not political surrogates, reviewed them. They did not advance charges. That matters. But it doesn't end the story. It complicates it. Because the single most significant insider in Epstein's criminal enterprise was Ghislaine Maxwell. Convicted, sentenced, the operational partner in trafficking minors. If anyone alive had firsthand knowledge of who crossed the line from social acquaintance to criminal participant, it would be her. And when Maxwell was formally questioned by federal investigators about Trump specifically, under conditions where false statements could trigger additional prison time, she denied witnessing or hearing of inappropriate conduct by him. She described him, in her words, as a gentleman in the context she observed. That is not a partisan talking point. That is sworn testimony contained in federal records. Now pause. Because this is where intellectual honesty becomes uncomfortable. Maxwell is a convicted sex trafficker. Her credibility is permanently scarred. She has incentives, legal, strategic, personal, to calibrate what she reveals. No serious analyst would treat her statements as sacred truth. Her testimony must be weighed against motive and context, but dismissing it outright because it disrupts a preferred narrative is just as corrosive as ignoring Trump's long social association with Epstein. And corrosion is the theme here, because what's unfolding isn't just a debate over one man's name in a file. It's a test of whether a politically fractured public can still distinguish between documented evidence and algorithmic insinuation. The Epstein documents are vast. They map
the investigation was begun at the urging of an anti-monarchy group led by Graham Smith, who first notified authorities that they found evidence in the Epstein files that could indicate Andrew was passing British government secrets to his friend, the sex trafficker and child rapist Jeffrey Epstein. She wrote this today after Andrew's arrest. His arrest comes just 4 days after the Daily Mail reported that he passed on sensitive information about the taxpayer-owned Royal Bank of Scotland to Epstein when he was representing the UK as a trade envoy.
They map a network of elites who orbited a predator. Some were complicit, some were oblivious, some may have suspected and stayed silent. Silence, morally, is not innocence, but silence legally is not guilt. Judges reviewing newly unsealed grand jury transcripts from earlier investigations noted that those records identify Epstein and Maxwell as the central actors in sexual contact with minors. They do not name Trump or other public figures as direct participants in that specific conduct within those transcripts. That's a narrow finding, but it's a finding. So what are we left with? A documented social relationship between Trump and Epstein spanning years. A convicted co-conspirator denying firsthand knowledge of misconduct by Trump. DOJ assessments declining to pursue charges based on reviewed allegations, and a public hungry for a smoking gun that may or may not exist. Here's the tension. The absence of charges is not proof of moral virtue, but the absence of evidence is not proof of criminal guilt. And conflating those two is how democratic discourse deteriorates. Because once appearing in a contact list becomes equivalent to conviction, the standard of evidence collapses. Today, it's Trump. Tomorrow, it's anyone inconvenient. But don't misread this as exoneration theater. The fact that a future or former president socialized for years with a man who was systematically abusing minors is itself a staggering indictment of elite culture. It speaks to a moral ecosystem where proximity to power insulated predators. That culture is bipartisan. It is transnational. And it is deeply corrosive. The real scandal may not be whether Trump committed a specific crime within Epstein's network. The deeper scandal is how many powerful people tolerated Epstein's presence until he became radioactive. That is institutional decay. And decay rarely announces itself with a single explosive revelation. It seeps, it normalizes, it teaches citizens to either overreact to fragments or ignore patterns entirely. Which is why this moment matters more than the viral thumbnails suggest. If further document releases produce direct, verifiable evidence implicating Trump or any other figure in criminal conduct, the response should be swift, legal, and uncompromising. Due process is not weakness. It is the spine of a constitutional system. But if documents continue to show association without substantiated criminal evidence, then honesty requires acknowledging that too, even if it frustrates partisan appetites, because the alternative is a culture where outrage precedes facts and facts become optional. And that is how democratic norms erode. The Epstein case is about victims whose lives were shattered. It is about a justice system that once delivered a grotesquely lenient plea deal. It is about networks of influence that protected reputations while young girls were exploited. That is the moral core. Reducing it to a single political scalp without evidentiary foundation risks turning tragedy into content. And yet, ignoring Trump's documented proximity would be equally dishonest. Powerful men are responsible for the company they keep, especially when that company includes predators. So hold both realities at once. Trump's name appears. That is true. Direct criminal implication in released materials, according to DOJ evaluations and sworn insider testimony, has not been established. That is also true. If that duality feels unsatisfying, good. Complex truth often does. But here is the final escalation. The continued release of these files will test whether the public can process incremental evidence without swinging between blind defense and blind condemnation. It will test whether institutions can investigate power without fear or favoritism, and it will test whether citizens demand standards of proof or surrender to viral momentum. You are not a passive observer in that test. Every time you share unverified claims because they feel emotionally gratifying, you lower the evidentiary bar that protects everyone, including you. Every time you refuse to examine uncomfortable facts because they complicate your political alignment, you contribute to the informational decay that predators exploit. Staying engaged with this story, carefully, critically, relentlessly, is not about defending or attacking one politician. It's about defending the principle that accusation requires evidence, and that evidence deserves scrutiny. If you disconnect from that responsibility, the vacuum will be filled by distortion. So stay here, stay alert to each document release. Examine what is actually said under oath. Pay attention to what prosecutors conclude, not what partisans imply. Because civic vigilance in moments like this is not optional theater. It is the barrier between a constitutional republic and a mob convinced that screenshots are verdicts. The Epstein files are forcing a reckoning with power, proximity, and proof. Whether that reckoning strengthens democratic norms or shreds them depends on whether you choose disciplined analysis over emotional impulse. And if you understand that the real fight here is over standards of truth in a system already strained by distrust, then you already know why remaining connected to serious, evidence-driven scrutiny isn't a subscription preference. It's a civic act. Because when institutions wobble and narratives weaponize trauma, informed vigilance becomes a form of resistance. And resistance, in fragile times, is how democracies survive.